Welcome to the IT Matters Podcast, where we explore why IT matters and matters pertaining to IT. Here's your host, Aaron Bock.
Welcome all to the IT Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Bock, as you heard. We're very excited for this episode of the IT Matters Podcast. We have the principal and CEO of Equals 11, Jim Marascio, joining us. Jim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fabulous. Hope you are too, Aaron.
Doing fantastic. I've known Jim for a while. Excited to get him here today on the podcast to share some of the knowledge he has with you. Jim, why don't you share with the listeners a little bit about your background in IT and around IT and all things in between, your family, et cetera?
Sure. Without being too boring, I'll try to brush through it. So I grew up at a time when PCs were becoming popular, which basically says I'm old. And I was really fortunate when personal computers were starting to become personal to get to go to a coding camp as a fourth grader and start a computer club in junior high, and really just kind of grew up in the 80s as things were happening and becoming more accessible to everybody. So when I went away to college, was a real natural fit to become a computer information systems major. A lot of time hands-on keyboard, started writing some software, and graduated and wrote some code. Wasn't probably the best coder out there, but I really enjoyed being in and around that space. So I was fortunate to start in a large organization with a lot of opportunity for personal and professional growth, and pretty quickly moved into a management role. I got to lead software engineering. And at a time at the really turn of the century, again, I'm pretty old, when
give yourself a little more credit.
Yeah, when there were some really interesting things happening in the audio space. If you go back to late 90s, early 2000s, when Napster and MP3.com were all over the news and everybody was suing everybody in the music royalty space. I happened to be at a large media company that was doing the legal things correct, and was fortunate to kind of work myself into a role where I get to lead the transformation of the organization, a global organization.
Hold on. People don't understand how, when you were using the Napster, BearShare, LimeWire days, you would download a song on DSL and you'd wait like 10 minutes just to find out it's a horrible version or not the right version.
Exactly.
One of the worst feelings in life.
Yeah, exactly. And more often than not, it wasn't what you thought it was. It was.
Yeah, and it had a virus along with it, and then your computer. Yeah, your parents were yelling at you.
Yeah, so I was kind of coming of age career wise at that time in a media company. And I got to be very entrepreneurial, which kind of influenced where my career went from there. So I didn't realize I was being entrepreneurial, but in a large business, I effectively sat down with the VP I reported to and said, ignore all the stuff they're doing illegal. We need to do what they're doing. And the comment back was, well, they're getting sued and we can't. I said, no, we're already doing that stuff legally. And one conversation led to another, and before you knew it, I had a large budget and I was building out effectively a new division of the company, kind of Wild West, digitizing literally millions of songs with college students hand entering all the data for months and months and months. And we ripped more than 2 million songs and built a content management system before CMS was a term, and built a content delivery network before CDN was a term. And just didn't know I was being entrepreneurial, but was doing some really cool stuff in the software space, built a media player before an iPod was a thing or an iPhone was even pondered. And learned a lot doing that, building software. And that led me to go to a startup, my first real startup in the digital signage space, transferring a lot of what I was doing with audio and doing it with video, led again a software team and built some really cool things there. And one thing led to another. So my entire career has kind of progressed through the IT space. I've worn a lot of hats: CIO, CTO, COO, Chief Delivery Officer. But I've always had this component of software engineering that I was responsible for. And it all started out with, fourth grade going to a a camp and trying to write something in logo, which probably won't mean anything to most of the people listening to this. But it all started there, and it's been a fun ride along the way. And as you mentioned, I've got a company now, a software company that plays in the Salesforce space, and we focus purely there, developing software and configuring Salesforce to help optimize it for best use for existing clients.
Yeah. And before we get into Equals 11 and what you're doing today, like you said, you've been in a big organization with a large IT budget. You were in some startups and you had bounced around CIO, CTO, et cetera.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about on this podcast in different industries. What is IT to people? Why IT? How is IT viewed? You've seen it from all perspectives in big and small organizations.
Yeah. What
do you see in IT where companies are doing it well? And what do you see where they're not doing it well? What are some of the common traits and common flaws?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll start with is you can tell a lot about how IT is viewed within an organization by the reporting structure. If IT reports, if you've got a VP of IT or a CIO or whatever the highest IT title is, and that person reports to the CFO, more than not, it's considered an expense. It's kind of a necessary evil, if you will, of the business, within the business. And generally they're focused on the infrastructure and not necessarily advancing the business forward, but kind of holding the fort. What needs to be to make sure the phones work and the network works and the laptops work and those types of things. If you start seeing an IT organization that either reports directly to the CEO or the COO, all of a sudden there's more of an opportunity for it to be strategic. And in my opinion, the best IT organizations are the ones that are there expressly with the purpose of advancing whatever it is that business does. So to me, as I work with other companies or when I've looked at going to work for other companies, it's always been really important to understand kind of the reporting structure and how they look at IT. If IT gets to interact with the entire business and sits down as a strategic partner and says, well, what is it that HR needs to do to be successful? What is it that the product or service side of the business needs to do to be successful? What is it that finance or the support team needs to do to be successful? Then those are generally really fun IT organizations to be in because they're part of the business. They're not kind of regulated to just, again, supporting the infrastructure and the wires and power and phones and that type of thing.
Do you think that, so you mentioned where you see companies, reporting structure tells a lot. In the organization where the CIO or CTO is reporting up through the CEO or COO, mm-hmm. Do you typically on the stereotypical bell curve of like behind or ahead, do you typically see those organizations more on the front of the bell curve versus the back? Is that typically the breakdown, or is it
more likely to be on the front? I wouldn't necessarily put them that way because a lot of it depends on what's the culture of the organization. Where does the board or the leadership team, depending on the size of the organization, want the organization to go? Are they acting strategically to advance the organization, or are they in a difficult position where they're trying to control costs and those types of things? So it certainly helps to be structured in a way that I prefer, but how they are or where they are in the bell curve is really more indicative of the leadership of the organization. And are they moving something forward, trying to create and build and advance, or are they trying to salvage and restore and hold the fort?
Yeah. So let's get to where you're at now. So Equals 11, you are the CEO of Equals 11. Tell our listeners. You mentioned it already, Salesforce development, custom Salesforce development. Share 30 seconds to a minute on what you guys do, what you specialize in, and maybe the why behind it.
Sure. So I'll step back and say, I knew I wanted to build a software company. As you mentioned earlier, I've been involved with a couple startups. I've come in as employee 4 or 9 a couple times and helped other people kind of build their vision and their dream. And it's been a lot of fun. And I got to this point where I said, I want to lead the effort. I want to do this. I'm not getting younger, and I'm going to regret if I don't take a swing at this at some point in my life if I don't do it soon. So when I knew I wanted to build a software company, the first thing was, okay, what are we going to do? And I right out of the gate, having been in and around and worked with a lot of software companies, I knew I just didn't want to be, and there's nothing wrong with them, but more of a generalist company that does a lot of front end web app and a lot of mobile app and that type of thing. I really wanted to be specialized. I think it helps to articulate what it is you do and resonate with people and figure out if there's a fit or not, if you've got some specialty. So we looked at a lot of different platforms, if you will, CRMs, ERPs, and whatnot, from SAP and Oracle to PeopleSoft, Adobe Experience Manager, HubSpot, tons of them, and ultimately settled on Salesforce for a lot of reasons. Number one, CRM in the world plays really well from really tiny businesses up through enormous, Fortune 50 enterprises. But it plays really well in the mid-market space. And we said, as we're building out a business, that was really where we wanted to operate, was in that mid-market, say $25 million to $1 billion. Companies that have a budget and have vision and can work on something, but aren't so large that they're either moving exceptionally slow or candidly, they're not going to talk to a really small early stage business because of their size. So we made a lot of decisions around how to position that. And then even within the Salesforce ecosystem, if you're not familiar with it, Salesforce started as a CRM, and it's still known as a CRM. It still is. However, it's built out an entirely broad platform and a suite of products and services and tools that really extend from marketing technology to service to everything in between, and obviously the CRM and sales component of it. And so we said, well, where are we going to play in there and how we're going to do it? And we ruled out some things pretty quickly. And I know I'm way beyond my 30 seconds here, but where we focus is on the what I refer to as post-implementation optimization. So what does that mean? In that mid-market space, we try to work with customers that are existing Salesforce users. They have some kind of pain, again, kind of stepping back to that IT conversation at the beginning of this recording. When you look at an implementation, it tends to be more of a change management exercise or more of a people and almost management consulting exercise, not as much of a technology thing, because you're trying to change how the organization works by implementing a new tool within it. So we said, no, we're really more techies. So not to say we won't do some of that, and we are actually doing a little bit of that right now, but where we're trying to play is in this space where we come in and there's a business that's using Salesforce, they're feeling some pain at some level, and they need to optimize it, and through things like integration with other business systems, reporting and dashboarding, custom workflows that align with their workflow, automation, lots of other things like that. But hopefully that gave you a little bit of a sense.
Yeah. And I think something you said about for anyone out there who's thinking of, I don't want to say starting just a software company, but you said we picked Salesforce, and I feel like specializing is better. At Opcala, we see a lot of companies who sometimes they specialize and they do really well. Sometimes they try to do everything and they don't do it really well. And it's very common for folks to kind of get in over their skis, say they do all these things, and then it's hard to know all these different systems, especially Salesforce, the behemoth it is in the space. There's so many things that they keep adding that they're doing. It's hard to be a specialist in more than one. So I applaud you for that. Let's take a step back in the whole market. So Salesforce, I think hopefully everyone has heard of it. If you haven't, it's CRM, customer relationship management. If you don't know what that software stands for, that's where companies are tracking their leads. That's where they're tracking their customers, their prospects. It's all of their customer data. And in this customer-centric world we live in, especially, post-COVID, it's even more important to have a good customer management. It's kind of shocking, some of the stats about CRM. I thought, everyone's got it. It's just like an ERP, which is an enterprise resource planning tool for your organization. It's your core system. I assumed when I started looking into this, everyone had it. But Jim, you might be able to share some statistics, but I have a couple here. One of the ones that was shocking to me was it said that in the next 5 years, there will be 12% CRM adoption growth, which for those listening, 12% may not seem like a lot, but to me, I was like, man, I didn't even know there was 12% of customers out there or companies out there that didn't use a CRM. So Jim, maybe you can share some stats with us. Why do you think this adoption is taking place? What's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years in the CRM space?
Sure. So for starters, that number doesn't surprise me at all. It's probably leaning more towards smaller businesses than large enterprises. Large enterprises have been using CRMs as an extension of ERPs for 25 years. But when you get into the mid-market and smaller, especially SMBs, they're still operating out of spreadsheets. One of the areas that we see a lot of opportunity and a lot of challenge is effectively siloed data. And what that means is they're storing whatever, they've got different business processes for different departments within a business, and they're all storing that data somewhere else. So to your point, businesses are then saying, okay, we've got a spreadsheet here and we've got some contact manager here that's not really a CRM, but it's acting as a CRM. And then I've got a bunch of people over here that all have their own individual things that are built into Outlook or Gmail or whatever that is their contact management. And they're siloing data throughout the business. And by bringing in a new tool, the expectation is, we're going to solve all the problems by implementing this new tool. We're going to centralize all the data into one place. And that poses some other challenges we can get into. But that percentage doesn't shock me at all, just because I'm encountering it every day with small businesses.
Why Salesforce? Why do companies pick Salesforce over another? And maybe the caveat here is, I know you work with Salesforce. We're not saying that there's any other systems that are not great. They're probably just as good. It's just, why does a company pick Salesforce over another?
I think first and foremost, it's the market leader. It has a proven track record over decades of evolving into what it is today. And it's I wouldn't say the de facto standard. There's some really good alternatives out there in Microsoft and SAP. And what you'll find is some of the bigger ones are built and designed to run in large enterprises. And very large enterprises, $1 billion plus companies. And most of the businesses in the world aren't $1 billion businesses. And so bringing a tool that's designed to work in an organization like that down into a smaller mid-sized business is sometimes incredibly expensive, overkill, more complex than it needs to be. And so Salesforce has built a really solid platform that works and kind of grows with you. So there are Fortune 50 companies. In fact, probably most Fortune 50 companies use Salesforce, but you'll find that most $3 million companies that are using a CRM use Salesforce as well. Yeah. So it's the market leader. It's designed and built in such a way that it integrates very well with other systems. There are a ton of out-of-the-box tools to connect it to other platforms, which is really important. If you're sending an email from Outlook, you're sending an email from Gmail, and you want to make sure that gets recorded and in your database, it's an out-of-the-box plugin. And so there's little things like that they've done a really good job building the platform with integrations and APIs in mind. The current version of Salesforce is called Lightning, and the Lightning version was built as an API first tool. So it was designed with everything in the data being able to go in or out through some very simple tools. The other big benefit of Salesforce is it was really designed as a low-code, no-code tool, meaning that you don't necessarily need a software developer to configure it or to integrate it with other systems. Much of it can be done by an administrator who's trained properly. The result of that is it's highly complex because there are so many ways to configure it, but it doesn't necessarily require a software engineer to do that. And when you do want to do things beyond what can be done through standard no-code or low-code configurations, there's APIs, again, that application programming interfaces that allow data to be exchanged with other systems bidirectionally, so data flowing in or out, that you can bring in Salesforce developers that can then work to make sure that all works. So they built a really flexible platform that scales exceptionally well.
Yeah, there's a great book called Beyond the Clouds by Mark Benioff, the founder of Salesforce. If the listeners out there have not heard it, I would recommend it for more than just understanding Salesforce. He's a very, the word's leaving me, but he donates a lot of money to charity, and he's very big on giving. And I think that's how Salesforce started. So it's a really cool story. Before we get too far into Salesforce, you mentioned, the small businesses is where you see the 12% growth. Let's start with those small businesses who may not be using a CRM today, whether it's Salesforce or, like you said, Microsoft or another one. Why would you tell someone to use? What's the importance of using a CRM if you were talking to a business owner who didn't?
Sure. I think the first thing I touched on earlier, which is siloed data. It's important to have all of your data in one place so that you can react and respond to your clients and the market needs, so that you can make decisions through reporting and dashboards that allow you to really understand what's happening within your business. And if you've got disparate information all around the organization that can't be aggregated into one place and then reported on, it's very difficult to not only just manage kind of the day-to-day, but really see the insights that are going to help you move forward. So I think that's first and foremost, is kind of centralizing your data so that everybody's going to one place, or maybe not going to one place, but they're accessing the data ultimately from one place because of integrations. So as an example, if your salespeople are collecting certain data during the sales process and pre-sales process, and then you close a deal, very often that customer data is needed to service with either a product or a service to provide whatever it is your business is doing, that a lot of that same data is needed. Likewise, if you're a service-related business, there's probably some support element to what you're doing, and that data carries through. So what you'll find is a lot of data kind of flows back and forth through the business. Then it goes to finance because invoices need to be paid. And then somebody doesn't pay an invoice, you need to know who to contact to connect or to collect from and whatnot. So you'll start seeing that there's a lot of common data that, especially with smaller businesses, is replicated throughout the organization. Then somebody changes in your client's business and you don't have an accurate record throughout your business. So you don't know who to contact when there's a support issue, or the client calls you and you don't have any idea who they are, even though somebody else in your business does know who you are. And that ends up creating a poor customer service experience for your client. And so it's really important to centralize that data and provide access. And in the Salesforce parlance, they talk about a 360-degree customer view. And so it's really important for all of you, every area of your business, to have that same 360 view of the customer so that you can service them and hopefully, for business owners, grow those businesses.
You mentioned, the customer experience, and we'll get back to that because that's a theme. I mean, we talk with a lot of companies all across the country, and one thing we hear a lot is, I want to be able to give the Domino's pizza oven experience to my customers in whatever industry. Meaning, if you guys have ever ordered a Domino's pizza out there, you can order it, you can track it on the app, but while it's cool to you that you can see your pizza go in and then there's a cartoon of the guy making it, et cetera, they're tracking your information all along the way. They see your history of ordering pizzas. They know you like pepperoni pizza on Wednesday night, and so they can send targeted ads. So there's a lot behind the scenes. Jim, a stat that I read, I think it was on CRM.org or something like that. As of 2011, the ROI for every dollar spent on a CRM was 560%. So $5.60 on a dollar, you would earn more by investing in a CRM. They're saying that the number now is like $8.71. It could be up to 30 to 1, meaning you're going to make $30 for every $1 you spend on CRM. And I think that goes back to the point you mentioned around data, like knowing your data, understanding your data, having your data in one place. So let's kind of get into Salesforce from those stats. So
sure.
Like when you talk about custom development and the importance of data, what is a trend that you see that it's starting to happen in CRM within Salesforce? It's a trend, or it's something you're seeing more of? And besides just, the importance of data, what is a trend out there that you're seeing that you think we'll see more of in the coming years?
Yeah, well, it was a really interesting report, and I can share it if you want to post a link to it later.
Yeah, we'll post it in the show notes.
Literally last Friday. So we're talking, this thing's a couple days old. Pulse and Salesforce did a survey of 500 CIOs globally of businesses with more than 1,000 employees. So good-sized businesses, not necessarily gargantuan businesses, but good-sized businesses and around the globe. So this isn't representative of a certain region of the United States or even the United States. It's a global thing. And one of the things that they saw change is related to the Great Resignation. So we've all been hearing about people leaving businesses and what's going on. And it's created this enormous challenge for businesses because when people leave, the information in their minds leaves. And so trying to automate workflows to do more with less because we can't hire because there's staffing shortages, especially in the tech space, and trying to utilize data better to make decisions so that when people leave, the knowledge that's in their minds doesn't go with them. I mean, it goes with them, but it's still within the business, has become a huge priority. And that was one of the trends that was new this year compared to the same survey a year ago. So that's just one example. They had some other things that came out of it, but that one was one that really jumped out at me because I've heard so much of quiet quitting and Great Resignation and whatnot over the last 90 days. It really made a ton of sense.
Gotcha. What about, I guess, maybe on the trend, but maybe in your experience or from things you've read, like what are some examples of really unique use cases that you're seeing for Salesforce that maybe weren't seen 5 to 10 years ago, or use cases that people are now starting to solve for with CRM and Salesforce that they weren't, however many years ago?
Sure. I think it comes back to the data, and it's not necessarily a Salesforce thing. Salesforce is one of the tools, but it comes back to the data. Experian Data Quality did a survey of 1,200 organizations a few months ago and found that 22% of contact records included bad data. So when I needed to reach out to Aaron, the phone number was wrong or the email was wrong or Aaron wasn't the person there anymore. And so huge trend there around bad data, and what we're seeing when we're talking to clients and when we're talking to prospective clients is discussions about how do we improve our data so we can create a better customer experience, so we can make it easier for our employees to do whatever it is we're doing as a business, and so that we just better understand the market there. Likewise, another survey was done of IT leaders, and there's been a lot of, for 5 years, there's been a ton of conversation around digital transformation, probably longer than 5 years, but 9 out of 10 IT leaders pointed to what I was talking about earlier, which is data silos. So data being disparate throughout the organization. 9 out of 10 IT leaders said that data silos were the biggest obstacle to performing digital transformation because their data isn't in one place. They can't advance the organization. So the first challenge they have to do is say, how do we organize all this data in one place so that it can be accurately and adequately shared with the various areas of the business that need it, and so that we better understand what we're doing and how we're doing it so we can manage it. There was another recent stat that I saw from Bain & Company that said if you could increase your customer retention by 5%, it would increase your profits by 25%. So it goes back to the whole adage that it costs less to grow a client and save a client than it does to find it, or than the cost of acquiring a new client or customer. And so back to the CRM aspect, if you want good customer retention, you need to know who that customer is. You need to know how they're interacting with your business and provide the right tools to your customer service team and to your account managers and whatnot. So it's really touching all areas of the business. And regardless of what CRM you're using, it's just important to have good data and good data practices. So as we're again talking with customers, it's as much around how do we get data from other business systems into Salesforce, or how do we get data from Salesforce into the other business systems you're using? Because sometimes they're using some other tool for account management. And so there's Salesforce tools that do that, but a lot of times there's legacy systems that a business use. So how do we exchange the data back and forth? How, when we change data in one area of the business, do we get that to flow back into the primary place within the business, which is probably Salesforce, but if they're using it, but it doesn't have to be. But more often than not, it's the primary place to go within the business. So we're working with our customers to do those things so they can make better decisions and service people better.
Gotcha. So we talked a little bit about the smaller companies and why a CRM and how they should use it. You've talked about data silos being a huge issue today with companies, in a digital transformation, wanting to see data in a better, more consistent manner. I think any of those folks listening who have been in IT for a long time or around IT know that one of the big problems with a big system implementation and using it company-wide is the actual implementation of the system. Do you implement it right? So, do you use all the modules? Have you implemented the modules right? Does everyone understand it? Are users aware of how to use it? So I know that that's a huge problem. And I know it's a huge problem in the bigger the company, because you have to make sure that the system is implemented right. So maybe you can speak to that. What are some of the challenges there? But then what I'd be curious of, and what you see in your day-to-day around this, is what are companies, they're using Salesforce today and they think they might be using it right, but there's just things that they're doing that are shooting themselves in the foot for the future. What are some of those common things you see, and maybe advice for some of those listeners out there that are Salesforce administrators or in a company using Salesforce? Like, what are things they can do on their own that would help, prevent some of those things?
Yeah, I think the first thing you need to acknowledge is a business isn't stagnant. It's always evolving. Things are changing, either outside market factors or things within the business. Your product's evolving, your clients are changing, the marketplace is changing. So thinking that you did something and it's done is probably a little bit naive. And it's really important to, put in a solution that's going to be flexible and scalable for you so that you're not constantly changing everything, but be prepared to be reviewing it and looking at how your business is evolving and what does that mean for the tools you're using, whether it's your CRM or it's some other system that the CRM may be interfacing with. The other thing related to that on the implementation side specifically is we see a lot of situations where implementations are done. And again, it's more of a change management exercise. And when it's done, it may address the needs of one department in the business, but every other department has got this who moved my cheese feeling where they're saying, okay, now I need to change the way I operate because of this. And that's the result of improper, inadequate planning. So I think, like anything else that's a significant change in your business, if you don't plan adequately, you result in technical debt that you have to then come back and reconcile. And sometimes, or not sometimes, almost always, the cost of resolving and addressing the technical debt that you created by not taking the time to plan and architect and design before you built ends up costing significantly more than the time and effort it would have taken to plan. So if you want to draw an analogy, think about building a house. If I said we're going to build a house and we just kind of threw up some kind of vague requirements and then came back and I said, well, I said I needed X number of bathrooms, but I didn't tell you how many needed to be on which floor. And now we've got to replumb the house. You're tearing down walls and running, the cost to do something after the house was built can be exponentially more than doing it when you're building the house the first time. So the same thing happens when you're doing any type of ERP, CRM implementation and customization and integration with other systems. So take the time to understand the outcomes that are desired, plan appropriately, architect appropriately, plan for scalability and flexibility, and then build to that. And then finally, don't think it's done when it's done. monitor and be prepared to evolve and make sure that you're resourced appropriately to do that, because your business is going to change and require new needs.
That's great advice. And I think I can speak to that personally. Apkala, we use Salesforce. It's funny. Every quarter we talk about, okay, here's the enhancements. Here's the things we want to do. And it's like, all right, we got them all done. It's like, well, wow, there's just as many for the next quarter. How did that happen? I thought we got all this stuff done. But like you said, business always changes. Processes evolve. People evolve. The technology evolves. There's new things you can do, APIs, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So you're right. It always changes. I'm curious, there is data out there on it, but I'm curious what you see. So we talked about implementations, data silos. Let's go back to all CRMs. So
sure.
Large companies, small companies, what is the single biggest challenge of using a CRM for an organization?
The people.
The people.
It's the people.
And is it not understanding why to use it? Is it the how to use it?
It's again a change management exercise, especially on implementation. People have some way they want to do something, and now you're giving them a tool. And if you think about the first time you drove a car, if you didn't know what to do, it was awkward. It was weird. And it may not, you may have, I learned how to drive on the Standard, and I remember getting out and telling my mom, no, I'm never want to drive again because this is too frustrating to me. I'll just ride my bike. And so I think anytime you're asking people to change the way they do something, it can be uncomfortable. So recognizing and getting people to focus on the fact that the process is going to be uncomfortable, but the outcome is going to be much better once we work through it. So including everybody that needs to be done on that. And it's the same thing. And, again, we focus on post-implementation optimization, not necessarily implementation. It's the same thing, just at a smaller scale. If we're coming in and we're working with the Apkala team, and you need something, that there's going to be a little pain going through the process of building out that until it's done. But you've got to be focused on, at the end of this, it's going to be better, and here's why. And so it's worth that cost. And it goes back to that whole adage that until the cost of staying the same exceeds the cost of change, you're never going to change. So you've got to get to the point where you say, okay, it's going to be painful. It's going to cost something to change, but it's going to be worth it.
Well, if it helps people out there listening, we already shared the ROI metrics of 5 to 1 or 8 to 1 or 30 to 1. You pick the one you want to use to tell the story. I've also read, because we work with a lot of different folks in sales, salespeople are 3 times as likely to hit their quota if they're using a CRM that's well built versus not. So we don't need to dive into that, but hopefully for those out there who are focused on sales, CRM is a great tool. A couple of final questions for you on maybe CRM or Salesforce specifically. We already talked about data, but what is maybe a new feature that you're seeing from Salesforce that they're rolling out, or new trend features in all CRM that you're going to see?
Sure. So I'll say more newly being implemented. Salesforce has an AI, a rapidly evolving artificial intelligence engine they call Einstein. And so it's been around and evolving for a few years, but adoption's starting to really happen. And as you look at a business and you think about, we need to get data from here to there. We need to enter the data. We've got this marketing campaign that went out. We need to track this information that's coming back in. A lot of those things can be very repetitive tasks, or can be predictable based on certain behaviors. So effectively, you identify a scenario: when this happens, this happens, and this happens. This needs to happen. So why have a person do that? If it's predictable and you know what the scenario is, if you think about your camera on your iPhone recognizes where the face is, so you don't have to choose where to focus. It's because Apple and Google, the same thing with their phones, put AI into it to identify the face and change the focus point. If there's parts of your business that you can predict certain patterns, and when this happens, this is what we need to do, managing that with humans can be really ineffective. And very, very costly. There's more opportunity for error. There's a higher cost to do it. Taking the time to implement an AI-based solution to look for those scenarios and actually handle the data for you is something that we're seeing rapidly being adopted and having a lot of conversations about. Again, back to that bad data. A lot of the bad data is predictable. A lot of times it may be humans. I enter a name, last name first. You enter it first name first. I put a the before the name of a business. You don't want to have a the in your database. So let's truncate and pull it out. You can create rules and find things like that. You can scan forms and look for things that look like addresses and automatically populate the addresses in there. You can scan form. A computer can look at an email and see where the phone number is, where the email is, where the name is, and all that, and automatically update your records so you don't have to have a human do that. So being able to use artificial intelligence is huge in this space, and it's only going to get bigger.
Yeah. And I would add to that another thing that we're seeing in our space. We do a lot in the collaboration space is we see a lot of monitoring down to a social media account level and tracking that data in Salesforce or CRM. You know,
the marketing technology, the MarTech side of this is huge as well.
It's huge because you could tell not only what people like, who they cheer for, what their family looks like. Are they happy? Are they sad? I mean, there's so much around it. And then you think of the product marketing around it. My wife always tells me I'm a marketer's dream because I see a commercial and I'm like, we should go. Yeah. So within if they could track my eyes, like I'm watching a commercial, Aaron's probably going to go purchase that food in about 5 minutes. It's pretty sad, but I'm probably in a lot of Salesforce databases out there for anything food related. So,
look at what Amazon's done. Look at what Google's done. All the, the creepy things that, Alexa must be listening to me. I saw this ad next when I was here, or Google must be listening. My phone's listening to me, and I got presented this and that type of thing. Absolutely, there's truth to a lot of that creepy stuff. There's tools to do that. I think there's some ethical things that need to be factored into how do we do this and how do I do it in a way that doesn't feel creepy? Because really, if it feels natural and, Apkala was paying attention to my needs and they presented this, then there's value. If it was, Jim was spying on me, I won't say Aaron would do it, then it's creepy. And so there's amazing tools to do those things, and we can help you do that. And part of it is working through that user experience level, just like anything else. The UX matters, and you don't want to freak people out.
As long as it's like, I think it was the movie in the 90s, Smart House. As long as it's getting all my preferences exactly right and it's delivering me, the product exactly when I need it, I guess I don't care. But if it starts doing it wrong, then we've got problems.
Oh yeah, you definitely notice when it's wrong, or you notice when it does things that you didn't want it to know.
Exactly.
Target got in some trouble, 5, 6, 7 years ago when it started sending diaper advertisements to people that shouldn't, their parents didn't want to know that they were doing things or stuff like that. So, there's definitely either an uncomfortable factor because it's wrong and it feels wrong, or a creep factor because it's right and it's not something you wanted to be so overt with.
Maybe that's our episode, follow-up episode to this, is the ethics, compliance, and security of all CRM. But Jim, I know that you've got things to do, and I appreciate you coming on the show. I think one final question for you, and I ask all my guests on this show, on the podcast, if you could stand in front of 1 million people, we'll call them Salesforce users or CRM users or potential business owners. You're speaking in front of 1 million people and you give them a piece of advice about technology. It could be Salesforce, CRM specifically. What would you tell them?
I think it goes back to what I said earlier is take the time to plan, figure out what the objective is. A lot of times technologists, and I've probably made this mistake along the way too. Technologists can geek out a little bit and want to use technology because it's cool and fun, or we can say, oh, that's the problem, let's solve it. And if you don't take the time to really understand what the problem is, what the desired outcome is, what the user experience needs to be, then you'll create that technical debt again. So I think regardless of what it is, but absolutely in the CRM and in the Salesforce space, understand what you need to be doing, what the outcome is, and then architect the solution to deliver that, but also be in a position to be flexible enough so that as your business evolves from that point, you have something that's a strong foundation to build and grow from, rather than something that maybe you have to tear down and rebuild.
That is great advice. And Jim, thank you for being on the show today on the podcast. We will put some of the links that we talked about, some of the technology in the show notes so that you listeners out there have it. Thank you all for listening. Jim, thank you for joining us. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thanks again, Aaron.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for listening. The IT Matters podcast is produced by Upcalla, an IT advisory firm that helps businesses navigate the vast and complex IT marketplace. Learn more about Upcalla at opkalla.com.